my name is Jamie Wojciechowski. Thank you for joining me for my live professional presentation. This presentation is for my Criminal Justice 4930 seminar. Overall, I'm supposed to give a presentation to one of my projects that I've done thus far for the year. And the project that I've chosen, it was our first project. We were allowed to choose any topic that we wanted, as long as it corresponded to a chapter within our book. And I chose sex offenders and sex offender policies. Reason why I picked this topic is conveniently enough, my sister, she's actually a probation parole officer for sex offenders. So criminal justice, sex offenders, juvenile justice is all ran in my family. So I thought I would dive a little deeper into the topic. As far as my audience here, I have my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and my boyfriend. But you can't see him, he's tucked away in the corner. And my presentation is displayed on the TV through HDMI, and I will be going through the computer. Alright, so, sex offenders and sex offender policy. First is the introduction, which has the definitions of a sex offender. The legal definition of a sex offender is a person who has been convicted of a crime involving sex, such as rape, molestation, sex trafficking, or possession of child pornography. The classifications of a sex offender, there's two different classifications, and they are individuals who have committed forcible rape and individuals who have committed sexual assault. Special laws for sex offenders, the impact of sexual abuse on its victims and society. So sex offenders are placed in a different category when it comes to the criminal justice system. Nearly every state and many countries hold sex offenders to different standards. There are two principal arguments used by lawmakers that justify having special laws for sex offenders. These two arguments are, one, that sexual abuse has a significant impact on its victims and society, and two, the high rates of recidivism by sex offenders. Studies show that victims of sexual assault, both adults and children, experience post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. Children with sexual abuse are more likely to suffer from increased anxiety and depression, somatic complaints, social withdrawal, anger and aggression, substance abuse, and sexual behavior problems. Displayed in this PowerPoint. Continuation of special laws for sex offenders. These are some statistics collected from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. 94% of women who are raped experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder during the 2 weeks following the rape. 30% of women report symptoms of PTSD 9 months after the rape. 33% of women who are raped contemplate suicide, and 13% of women who are raped attempt suicide. Approximately 70% of rape or sexual assault victims experience moderate to severe distress, a larger percent than any other violent crime. One of the most notable things in regards to any sexual assault, any sexual crimes, is that anything related to rape is the most underreported crime. In 2008, per the National Crime Victimization Survey, 59% of rape cases assaults were not reported to a law enforcement agency. In 2014, per the National Crime Victimization Survey, 33.6% of rape or sexual assaults were reported. In 2015, the National Crime Victimization Survey, 32.5% were reported. So as you can see, between the years, it's decreasing. Working in a hospital, we have a sexual assault treatment center at Sinai Samaritan Hospital, and you can just tell. I mean, the cases, the experiences of people coming in, they're very far and few between. But when you do have those personal experiences, you just empathize for them. There are special laws for sex offenders, the high recidivism of sex offenders. Sexual offenders pose a high rate of engaging in further offenses after release, and protection from these offenders is paramount for public interest. There's a big debate going on between belief of are sex offenders going to are they going to react on these actions? Are they not going to react? Some studies show that there is a higher recidivism rate. Some studies show that there isn't. A lot of times the different studies contradict themselves. This specific survey shows that after 5 years after release, 14% are likely to re-offend. You can see the difference in statistics as the sex of boy, girl, and what type of offense that they're going to do, rape or incest. Continuation of the special laws for sex offenders. The study of population, juvenile sex offenders, adult child molestation. These are different topics that correlate to what category would the recidivism fall into. The diverse definition of recidivism, that's another reason as to those differences between people saying there is high, there is low. Data sources such as self-reports, arrest records, or convictions. Obviously, from the previous slides that we saw before, there's differences. I mean, obviously, not everyone is reporting these. So lack of reports can lead to altered data. Follow-up period, a few months to 25 years. I honestly can say that I don't know if they do a lot of follow-up for victims. I've heard before that that's one of the areas that needs improvement. And then the sample characteristics, such as the person receiving treatment in the community, persons released from prison, and those in mental hospitals. Next, I'll discuss cases that are memorialized into legislation. So there are 4 that I'm going to focus on. First is the Jacob Wetterling Act. On October 22nd, 1989 in Minnesota, Jacob Wetterling, his brother, and a friend were riding their bikes home when a masked man appeared and abducted Jacob at gunpoint. Jacob's case went unsolved until September of 2016, where his remains were discovered. Danny Heinrich was named in connection to the case. The Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act requires that all states establish a registry that keeps track of offenders that have committed sexual or sexually violent crimes against children. Under this law, all states must verify the addresses of sex offenders every year for a minimum of 10 years. Sexually violent offenders are required to verify their addresses quarterly for the entirety of their lives. So overall, due to the suffering that this child went through, his act created the sex offender registry, which everyone can access. I've used several times anytime I've moved. We've looked up friends' houses just to see. You can log on to just Google, search for sex offender registry, and you can see what sex offenders are living in your area and what crime they were convicted of. So as this slide shows, it just gives a brief history of his case. And then as it says at the bottom, this case played a crucial role in the creation of protecting children from sexual predators. This registry allowed police to keep track of convicted sexual offenders in the area. The next one is Megan Law. So the Jacob Wetterling Act is the one that we saw before. Megan's Law amended the previous act. So Megan's Law requires that law enforcement agency make this information public. So the parents of Megan Konka felt that Jacob's Law didn't do enough to protect the children from sexual predators. They were to create Megan's Law, which is a subsection of the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act. Megan Laws builds upon its predecessor by requiring the information on sex offender registries to be made to the public. The parents to Megan felt that if they would have known that there was a sex offender living close to their home, that they would have been more cautious and that they would have been more opposed to letting their daughter out. So Megan's history, her story, was that she was raped and murdered by their neighbor, Jesse. Megan was lured into Jesse's house by Jesse offering her to see his puppy. So as morbid as it sounds, you always hear those stories about, the creeps in the vans and trying to lure the kids in. This actually happened to this young girl. After he raped her, he slammed her head into the dresser, put a plastic bag over her head, and strangled her to death with a belt. The next one is the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. The Adam Walsh Child Protection Safety Act organizes sexual predators into 3 separate tiers based on the severity of their crimes. Tier 1 offenders are required to update their address every year and register as a sex offender for 15 years. Tier 2 offenders must update their address every 6 months and register as a sex offender for 25 years. And Tier 3 offenders, which is the most serious category, are required to update their address every 3 months and be registered as a sex offender for the remainder of their lifetimes. Tier 2 and Tier 3 offenders must be made public information by the state, and failure to comply with these requirements is a felony. So Adam's story is that he was abducted from a mall in Florida on July 27th of 1981. He was lured into the vehicle by being offered toys and candy. Though Adam Walsh wasn't sexually assaulted, his case helped to create a new tier system that requires verification of child molesters. And the next one is Jessica's Law. Jessica's Law was passed in Florida. This law mandates a minimum sentence of 25 years and a maximum of life in prison for first-time child sex offenders, and requires the use of GPS following the release from prison of any sex offenders. To date, Idaho, Illinois, New Jersey, and Hawaii are the only states that haven't adopted this law or something similar. So Jessica was abducted from her home in Florida by a gentleman named John, who admitted to abducting, raping, and murdering her. She was actually buried alive. So as I stated before, this law now requires a minimum sentence and a mandatory of 25 years for first-time offenders, and that they have to wear a GPS following their release from prison. Next is the tools to analyze risk prediction. Currently, there are 3 different methods to analyze. It's a common belief that most sex offenders reoffend. However, this assumption is not supported by research. Risk assessment instruments have been created to determine the likelihood of a sex offender reoffending. So the first one, Static 99, is a 10-item assessment instrument for the use with male sexual offenders who are at least 18 at the time of their release into the community. This was created by a gentleman named Hansen, and it's the most widely used sex offender risk assessment. It's actually a combination of 2 previously existing risk assessment instruments, and those 2 are the Rapid Risk Assessment for Sexual Offense Recidivism and the Structured Anchored Clinical Judgment Minimum. The specific assessment is completed with 10 questions. The person is then given a score between 1 and 50. Lower scores represent a high or a low risk of recidivism, as opposed to a high risk, saying that the offender will reoffend. The next one is the SORAG, and that stands for Sex Offender Risk Appraisal Guide. This one's different as it's a 14-item scale designed to predict recidivism. This one holds the same concept as the one previously listed in the sense that each item is scored and assigned a specific weight. Depending on the score, the likelihood that the person will reoffend. Some of the items that are discussed in this specific analysis include if the person has a history of alcohol problems, if they were married at the time of the incident, histories of sexual offense against girls below the age of 14, if they've been diagnosed with schizophrenia, if they lived with their biological parents until the age of 16. Each item is scored and then assigned a weight based on the relationship of that item to the violent recidivism. And the bottom one, the long title for it, is the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool Revised. This one was created due to the Minnesota Department of Corrections requesting a more formal, uniform process to identify predatory and violent sex offenders. This one is a 16-point assessment, and it has the same concept. There's several different questions that are tied into predictions, and weights are given to the offenses. So this slide discusses sex offenders and their crime strategies. So the typical profile for a sex offender is a male. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of victims of sexual assaults or any sex crimes, the person actually knows the victim. They use common strategies to gain the access and compliance. They use some type of coercion or threats when manipulating fails. Younger offenders use violence to gain compliance. Older victims typically need more manipulation as opposed to the younger ones. You can bribe them much easier. What is known about the offenders is only known due to those who have been caught. And the modus operandi is the pattern of behaviors that perpetrators display in the periods prior to, during, and following illicit sexual contact. So when it comes to sex offenders, there's different types of scripts, meaning there's different brands that establish sex offenders. So the cornerstone script is home intrusion, track, and outdoor track. So these are two different instances of how a sexual predator would go about getting their victim. So the home intrusion track, they use the house of the victim. The encounter, the attack, the crime, and the release are all at the same site, more than likely at the person's house, somewhere close that they're quite often at, and there's use of physical violence. The outdoor trap, the attacker, the offender ambushes the victim. There's a public outdoor place. Location is familiar to both, and there's the use of physical violence to bring the victim to the crime scene. Manipulative scripts. So you have the sophisticated track and the family infiltrator track. The sophisticated track is a search based on prostitution market or workplace. Contact occurs outdoors. Public location familiar to both. Use of manipulation, gameplay, money, or gifts. And the assailant meets the victims opportunistically. The family infiltrator track seeks the victims within a family setting or through occupation. They use money, gifts, alcohol, drugs to approach the victim. Leads the victims to a crime scene and commits crime. And locations are private and indoor, typically the aggressor's home. And last is the non-persuasive script, which is direct action track. They pursue the victims in a public place. They make contact directly. They take the victim to the crime scene and then commit the crime. And then the crime takes place indoor at public places. So technological innovations. With technological innovations, sex offenders no longer need to focus on the environment. The internet allows sexual predators to stay hidden while making efforts to seduce their victims. Online child molesters use the internet to access youth, establish trust, introduce the discussion of sex, and then arrange for face-to-face encounters for sexual purposes. Next is the current laws and policies attempting to reduce sex crimes. One of them is that they are looking to have the minimum prison terms, which was discussed in one of the previous acts. Currently it's 25 for first-year offenders. Then there's special provisions for sex offenders after they're released from incarceration, such as having to wear GPS monitoring, day check-ins, and then the mandatory minimum prison. How to prevent sexual crimes. First is increasing efforts, make it harder for the offenders to commit the crime, and obviously be successful in preventing that. Increasing risk is such as improving surveillance at possible crime scenes. That can be as simple as, putting lighting up and having a camera. Patrolling prompts such as removing triggers that encourage sexual predators. And then reduce permissibility, such as challenge distorted beliefs, excuses, or minimization by offenders regarding the link between their behavior and its consequences. And then my last slide has to do with recent media topics surrounding sex offenders. So on the left-hand side, we have a map here. It's actually a map of city. So this topic can be touchy for many. As a parent, you always want what's best for your child. So you want to protect them from any potential harm. People assume that sex offenders are nothing more than predators looking for the next victims. The general belief is that sex offenders are a serious threat to public safety. This is why many people support residency restrictions. So residency restrictions typically state that a sex offender can't reside within a certain amount of feet from locations such as schools, daycares, or public parks. However, due to residency restrictions, actually what's happening is that sex offenders, after they're being released, because of these restrictions, are finding themselves homeless. So while, yes, residency restrictions are meant to keep the community safe in the same sense, by having these residency restrictions, they're becoming homeless. So then the police, their probation officers, they're not able to track the sex offenders. So then you have the homeless sex offenders, and you don't know where they're at. Just recently here in Wisconsin in September, this actually happened for Milwaukee, Common Council met to lift the sex offender residency restrictions. So right now, Milwaukee bans sex offenders from living 2,000 feet from schools, parks, or any daycare centers. The modification, if approved, would allow only a 500-foot buffer zone. So displayed in this picture, the picture states areas within 2,000 feet of schools. Everything in the red is where sex offenders can't live. And then you get down to the bottom, which is actually the airport. It's close to us. But looking over the general map of Milwaukee, it pretty much limits them to bad areas of the city which they could live. So it's a catch-22. While you want to protect the community, you want to protect the citizens from sex offenders. In the same sense, if you're not documenting them, where they're living, how can you ensure that they're not violating crimes again? And then another popular topic surrounding sex offenders is bans from social media. So once again, this year, June 19th, the Supreme Court struck down a North Carolina law. North Carolina, they created a law stating that sex offenders couldn't be on social media platforms. So they weren't allowed to be on Twitter, Facebook, any platform that a child, so anyone under the age of 14, I believe it was, could create an account. So the Supreme Court stated that this was unlawful, and the reason being is that the statute enacts a prohibition in the scope of the First Amendment speech. So our Supreme Court believes that sex offenders should be allowed on social media because it protects their First Amendment right to have access to social media platforms. Closing statements is obviously sex offenders is a touchy topic for a lot of people. A lot of people don't really take the time to learn about sex offenders and what the implications of laws such as sex offender registries, the restrictions and everything are. So I hope that through this presentation you've been able to learn a little bit more about sex offenders, and hopefully you never have to encounter any in your lifetime. Thank you.